Found her at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, parked behind a Walgreens on Clemson Road. I know the exact time because I looked at my phone right before I got out of my car, and I remember thinking, it's almost midnight. What am I doing? A 63-year-old woman alone in a parking lot in Columbia, South Carolina, following a pin someone dropped on a map? But I got out anyway, because she was my daughter, and something was very wrong. Let me back up. My name doesn't matter as much as the story does, but for the sake of telling it right, I'm Beverly. I'm 63 years old. I taught high school English for 31 years, retired early when my husband Franklin passed away from a stroke 4 years ago. Franklin and I had one biological son, who lives in Portland now with his family and calls me every Sunday like clockwork. And then we had Cecily. Cecily came to us when she was 4 years old. She was the daughter of my college roommate, Joanna, who passed suddenly, aneurysm. No warning, no goodbye. Joanna's ex-husband was already out of the picture, had been for years. Cecily had no one. Franklin and I had room in our house and more room in our hearts, so we said yes without hesitating. We adopted her formally when she was 6. She grew up sleeping under the same roof as my son, eating Sunday pot roast at my kitchen table, complaining about the same broken dishwasher we never got around to replacing. She was ours. Full stop. When she was 20, she started working at Alderman Financial Group, a mid-sized wealth management firm downtown. She got the job through a family connection, one I'm not proud of now. A man named Warren Cole was the CFO there. Warren was the husband of my cousin, Cherie. I'd known Warren for almost 15 years. Seemed solid. Seemed trustworthy. I called in a favor and he gave Cecily an entry-level position in the accounting department. She was good at it. She had Franklin's mind for numbers. Methodical, careful, caught things other people missed. By 22, she'd been promoted twice. She was making more money than I ever had teaching. Franklin would have been so proud of her. And then, 11 months ago, I got on a plane to Phoenix for my college roommate reunion. The friends I'd made after Joanna, the ones who'd carried me through Franklin's death. And 2 days later, my phone rang at 6 in the morning with my niece Cherie's number on the screen. I almost didn't answer. Cherie and I weren't close. We saw each other at Thanksgiving, exchanged birthday texts. But something made me pick up. Beverly, she said, and her voice was tight in a way that made my stomach drop before she even finished the sentence. I need to tell you something before you hear it somewhere else. Warren says they found irregularities in the accounts. A significant amount of money is missing. And the trail. Beverly, the trail leads directly to Cecily. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed in Phoenix, and I didn't say anything for a long time. How much? I finally said. Close to $900,000. I flew home that same afternoon. Cecily was gone. Her apartment, a little one-bedroom in the vista she'd been so proud of when she signed the lease, was empty in the way that tells you someone left in a hurry. Drawers pulled open, a few things scattered on the floor, her good winter coat still hanging on the hook by the door. She'd left so fast she forgot her coat. Warren told me, very carefully, very professionally, that they had documented evidence. Transactions over 14 months, routed through shell accounts covered with altered records. Someone inside the company with access to the firm's legacy system, old software, poorly secured, had been siphoning money in amounts small enough to not trigger automatic alerts. The total came to $882,000. He slid a folder across his desk toward me. I opened it. I looked at Cecily's name on account records, on transaction logs, on internal access reports, her employee credentials, her login times. I closed the folder and pushed it back. I want to see the raw data, I said. Not a summary, the actual system logs. Warren blinked. Beverly, I taught teenagers to write research papers for 30 years, I said. I know what a primary source looks like, and I know what a summary with an agenda looks like. I want the raw data. He said he'd have to talk to legal. I said I'd wait. I didn't wait. I went home and I tried to call Cecily. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I tried 12 times that first day. I left 3 messages. The first careful and calm. The second less so. The third one I'm not proud of. The kind of message you leave when fear sounds exactly like anger. I didn't hear back. I called my son in Portland. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which is something he learned from his father. Then he said, Mom, do you believe it? I thought about that for a while. I don't know, I said. And that's the problem. What I did next, I wouldn't recommend to anyone without the right disposition for it. I am, as I said, a retired English teacher. I am not an investigator. I am not a lawyer. I am a 63-year-old woman who graded 10,000 essays, coached the debate team for 11 years, and knows how to read a room. I started reading. I requested the raw system access logs from Warren. He eventually provided them, reluctantly, with a version that had been cleaned up for readability by someone in IT. I didn't know what I was looking at exactly, but I knew enough to notice things. The login timestamps on Cecily's credentials. Some of them were at 2 and 3 in the morning. Cecily goes to bed at 9:30. Has since she was a teenager. She'd inherited that from Franklin, too. I noticed that 3 of the largest transfers, each just under $50,000, had been initiated on days when Cecily had submitted PTO requests. She wasn't in the building. Her credentials were. I noticed a name that appeared in the access logs alongside Cecily's on several of those dates. An IT administrator. The name was Philip Dre. I didn't know Philip Dre, but I wrote the name down. I also called my friend Rosalind, who'd spent her career in banking compliance before she retired to Hilton Head. I read her some of what I was seeing over the phone, without saying whose name was on the records. She was quiet for a moment. "Beverly," she said slowly. "Those transfer times are strange. And if the PTO records hold up, that's not how someone embezzles money. That's how someone frames someone." I sat with that for 3 days. Then I hired a private investigator. His name was Gerald Tatum. I found him through a referral from my attorney, who handles estate matters, and probably thought I'd lost my mind. Gerald was quiet, efficient, and charged $400 a day, which I paid from the savings account Franklin and I had set aside for our grandchildren's education. I decided our grandchildren would forgive me. Gerald found Cecily in 11 days. She was in Columbia, staying in a neighborhood she'd known in college. The investigator's report was 3 pages long. He tracked her through a cash payment at a motel that was later connected to a debit card purchase at a grocery store. He confirmed she was living in her car, a 2019 Honda Civic, gray, and had been for approximately 3 weeks. Before that, she'd been at the motel. Before that, she'd apparently stayed with a friend until the friend asked her to leave, probably because of the risk. The report also noted, in plain clinical language in the second paragraph, that she appeared to be in the 2nd trimester of pregnancy. I read that sentence twice. Then I put the report face down on my kitchen table, and I sat there for a long time. She was 23 years old. She was sleeping in her car behind a Walgreens. She was pregnant. And she must have thought, that I believed she was a thief. I got in my car. I found her exactly where Gerald's map said she'd be. The Civic was parked at the far end of the lot, under a light that was half burned out. I pulled up alongside it and sat there for a moment. I could see her silhouette in the driver's seat, reclined slightly. She was awake. She must have seen my headlights. I got out of my car. She saw me coming, and for a moment she didn't move. Then she sat up fast, and I saw her reach for the door locks. She locked herself in. I stood at her window. I could see her face in the dim light, and she looked terrified. Not guilty, not defiant. Terrified. Like an animal that's been cornered and doesn't understand why it's being hunted. I put my hand flat on the glass. "Cecily," I said, "I'm not here because I think you did it. I'm here because I know something is wrong and you're alone and it's 40 degrees outside and I'm your mother." She didn't move for a long time. Then she unlocked the door. She cried for 20 minutes before she said anything coherent. I sat in the passenger seat and I led her, the way I'd learned to do when she was small and overwhelmed. Just stay present, don't push. Let the storm pass. The car smelled like fast food wrappers and the lavender lotion she'd used since she was a teenager. When she finally talked, it came out in pieces. She'd noticed the irregularities herself, that was the thing. 8 months before everything collapsed, she'd flagged something in the legacy system. Small amounts, weird routing. She'd brought it to her direct supervisor, a woman named Sandra Pruitt. Sandra had told her to write it up formally and submit it through the internal compliance portal. Cecily had done exactly that. Nothing happened. 2 months later, she flagged it again, this time directly to Warren Cole's office, because it had grown. She'd requested a meeting. His assistant had scheduled it and then canceled it twice. 3 months after that, Warren sat her down and told her she was being investigated. She panicked. She told me, and I had to hold myself very still when she said this. She tried to call me the night it happened. She said she'd dialed my number 3 times, and each time she hung up before it rang because she didn't know how to say it. Because she was afraid I would believe it. Because I'd gotten her the job through Warren, and some small, terrified part of her brain told her that meant I was connected to him in some way she couldn't yet understand. I asked her about the pregnancy. She looked at her hands. The father was a man named Troy Haynes. They'd been together for almost 2 years. When the investigation started and Cecily's name was all over it, Troy had very quietly ended things. He knew about the baby. He'd said in a text message, she showed me the text, that he couldn't be involved in the situation right now. The baby was due in March. I looked at that text for a long time. Then I handed her phone back. We'll deal with Troy later, I said. Right now, we're going to deal with this. I took her home that night. She slept in her old bedroom for the first time in 2 years. In the bed with the faded blue quilt Franklin's mother had made. I sat in the kitchen and I called Gerald Tatum at midnight and told him I needed everything he could find on Philip Dre and Warren Cole. Gerald called me back 48 hours later. Philip Dre had worked in IT at Alderman Financial Group for 6 years. He had administrative access to every system in the building, including the legacy accounting software. He had no disciplinary record, no red flags. But Gerald had found, through court record searches, that he had a civil judgment against him from 3 years prior. A gambling debt, $180,000, owed to a creditor in Atlanta who had sued him and won. That was interesting. What was more interesting was what Gerald found when he looked at Warren Cole's personal finances, using public records and a contact he had at a credit reporting agency, who operated in a legally gray area that I chose not to ask about. Warren had 2 mortgages, one on the house he shared with my cousin Cherie, one on a condominium in Asheville, North Carolina, and an LLC name that didn't obviously connect to him. The Asheville condo had been purchased 14 months ago. The first transfer Cecily had flagged had occurred 16 months ago. I called my attorney the next morning. She listened to everything. Then she said, "Beverly, you need to give this to law enforcement. You can't sit on it." "I know," I said, "but I need you there when I do." We went to the FBI field office in Columbia. Financial crimes, my attorney said, given the scale and the use of wire transfers. We brought Gerald's research, Cecily's original compliance reports with their submission timestamps, the system logs I'd requested from Alderman's IT department, and Cecily's own documentation. She'd kept copies of everything she'd flagged, saved to a personal hard drive, something Franklin had always told her to do. "Always keep your own records," he used to say. "Your memory is fallible. Paper isn't." The agent who took our meeting was thorough and largely unreadable. He asked Cecily questions for 2 hours. He asked me questions for 45 minutes. He took everything we brought. He said they would be in touch. They were in touch sooner than I expected. It took 6 weeks. I don't know everything that happened in those 6 weeks. I know that the FBI obtained warrants, that they examined the firm's complete server history, that they interviewed Philip Dre, who, according to a source I won't name, cooperated in exchange for consideration on his sentencing. What I know is that on a Wednesday morning in February, I got a call from my attorney telling me that Warren Cole had been arrested at his office at Alderman Financial Group. The charge was wire fraud, among others. The FBI had traced the full routing of the funds, through 3 shell accounts, into the LLC that held the Asheville condo, with an additional $340,000 moved offshore to an account in the Cayman Islands. $882,000. Planned over more than a year. Cecily's credentials used as the cover, because she was young, because she was my connection to Warren, because she had flagged the irregularities, and that made her both a threat and a convenient scapegoat. Philip Dre had accessed her login credentials through the legacy system's admin backdoor, which he'd created and which no one in management had known about. Sandra Pruitt, Cecily's supervisor, had been paid $15,000 to bury the first compliance report. She was charged separately. Cecily was formally cleared by the firm. A letter went to her personnel file and was CC'd to the FBI, the State Securities Board, and every member of Alderman's board of directors. She read that letter sitting at my kitchen table, and she didn't say anything when she finished it. She just folded it in half and held it in both hands for a while. Then she said, "I should have called you, the night it happened. I should have just called you." "Yes," I said. "You should have, and I should have made it more obvious over the years that you could." We sat with that for a moment, the weight of it, what it meant. "We'll do better," I said. She nodded. Cherie called me in March. I hadn't spoken to her since before Warren's arrest. I knew she'd been blindsided. She'd had no idea about the Asheville condo. No idea about any of it. Warren had kept that life completely separate. She was devastated in the way that only works when you realize you didn't know the person you built 30 years around. We talked for 2 hours. It was one of the harder conversations I've had, and I've had some hard ones. I told her I didn't blame her. I meant it. She said she was so sorry about what had happened to Cecily. I believe that too. I don't know where Shiri and I go from here. I don't know if we rebuild something or if we just maintain a respectful distance. What I know is that blame isn't the same as accountability, and both of us had to figure out where the lines were. Cecily's daughter was born on March 14th, at a hospital about 4 miles from my house. 6 pounds 11 ounces. I was in the room. I held her about 40 minutes after she arrived in the world. This tiny creature with her eyes screwed shut and her fists clenched like she was already ready to fight for something. Cecily named her Frances, after Franklin. The Frances was her idea, completely unprompted, and I had to leave the room for about 4 minutes when she told me. About Troy Haynes, Cecily sent him a formal notification through an attorney, documenting his knowledge of the pregnancy and his communication ending their relationship. He showed up at the hospital the day after Frances was born, full of explanations. Cecily let him in. She listened to everything he had to say. Then she told him, quietly and clearly, that she needed to see what he would do before she decided how to respond, that words at this point meant less than a pattern of behavior over time. She gave him her attorney's contact information and told him all further communication should go through there for now. She didn't slam a door. She didn't slam a door. She didn't make a scene. She gave him the same chance she'd give anyone, to show up or not, and live with that choice. I watched her do it, and I thought, Franklin would have loved seeing that. Warren Cole is awaiting trial. His defense attorney has filed 2 motions that were both denied. His attorney is very busy. Philip Dre reached a plea agreement. He's serving time. The gambling debt that started all of this, the $180,000 judgment that Warren had apparently offered to quietly resolve in exchange for Philip's help, remains unpaid. Some things don't resolve themselves neatly. Alderman Financial Group has since updated their legacy software, implemented multi-factor authentication on all financial transactions, and hired an external compliance auditor. A little late, but Cecily is back at work now, not at Alderman, but at a smaller firm, a good one, with people who recruited her specifically because of her compliance documentation skills. Her fraud report, the one Sandra Pruitt buried, was actually used as a model in a training seminar at the State Securities Board. Someone from the board called to tell me that. I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. Frances is 4 months old. She sleeps in the room that used to be my son's, in a crib Franklin's mother would have recognized. It's the same one we kept in storage all these years. On Sunday mornings, Cecily comes downstairs in her bathrobe and makes coffee while I hold Frances by the window that looks out onto the backyard. The one with the old magnolia Franklin planted the first spring we moved in. It's a quiet life. It doesn't look like what I thought it would, this stage of things. I thought I'd be traveling more, sleeping in, letting the days unspool slowly after 31 years of 7 a.m. alarm clocks. Instead, I'm learning at 63 that some of the most important things you'll ever do don't happen on a schedule. They happen in a parking lot at midnight, in the dark, when your child locks the door because she's afraid and you stand there anyway and put your hand on the glass. You stay. That's the thing. You figure out the truth, and you fight for it, and then you stay. There's a photograph on my refrigerator now. Cecily took it without telling me. She does that sometimes, catches me when I'm not looking. I'm standing at the kitchen window with Frances against my shoulder, both of us facing the backyard. You can see the magnolia. You can see the morning light coming through. Cecily printed it out and taped it up there without saying anything about it. I left it exactly where she put it. I've thought a lot, in the months since all of this, about the night I stood in that parking lot with my hand flat against a car window, about what it took to get there. Not the drive, not the private investigator, not the 6 weeks of reading system logs I barely understood. What it actually took, the decision made quietly and without fanfare, to not accept the story I'd been handed just because someone with authority had handed it to me. That's the thing nobody tells you about getting older. You'd think by 63 you'd be more willing to defer, more willing to let other people handle it, to trust the institutions, to say, well, they have the paperwork, they must be right. And there is a version of me, maybe not so different from the real one, who would have done exactly that, who would have sat across from Warren's desk, looked at that folder with Cecily's name on it and thought, I raised her well, but people change. People do things you don't expect. I didn't do that. And I've been trying to understand why, because I don't think it was purely instinct, and I don't think it was blind faith. I think it was something closer to intellectual honesty, the same thing I tried to teach my students for 31 years. Don't accept a conclusion just because it's presented with confidence. Go back to the source. Ask what's missing. Ask who benefits from the version of events you're being shown. Warren benefited. That's what the paperwork eventually showed. Every piece of evidence pointing at Cecily had been constructed by someone with something to lose and the access to make it look clean. And Cecily, 23 years old, pregnant, alone, sleeping in a gray Honda Civic, had run not because she was guilty, but because she'd learned, in the worst possible way, that the system she'd trusted to protect her had been quietly purchased. She'd done the right thing. She'd flagged the irregularities. She'd followed every protocol. She'd documented everything because her father had told her to, years before he was gone. And it hadn't protected her, not right away. That's the part that kept me up at night longer than anything else. Doing the right thing didn't save her from the parking lot. It didn't save her from 3 weeks of sleeping in her car, from losing her relationship, from the terror I saw in her face when she looked up and saw me coming. What eventually saved her was that she hadn't destroyed the documentation. She'd kept copies on her own hard drive, even when it would have been easier to walk away and let it all disappear. That is a kind of integrity that costs something real. It's not the integrity of a person who's never been tested. It's the integrity of someone who did the right thing even when the right thing was getting her nowhere, even when the system was using her own correctness against her. I think about that when I look at Frances now. 4 months old, no understanding of any of it, whole life still completely unwritten. What do I want her to know eventually? Not a list? Not rules. Just this, the choices you make when no one is watching. When the easier path is right there and no one would blame you for taking it. Those choices are the architecture of who you become. Warren Cole made a long series of small choices over 14 months and built himself a federal case. Cecily made a long series of difficult ones and built herself a record that exonerated her completely. That's not fate. That's not luck. That's cause and effect, playing out the way it almost always does, just slower than we'd like. I stood in the parking lot at midnight because my daughter needed someone to. I'd do it again without thinking. And she's going to know that. Frances is going to grow up knowing that's what you do for the people who are yours. You figure out the truth. You fight for it. And then you stay.